The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. On this edition we're very pleased to welcome to the show a first-timer. He is a criminal defense attorney in the area. I think most people have probably heard his name at one time or another, even if you're not in trouble with the law. Len Kachinsky is here, and in addition to being a criminal defense attorney, he's also currently the municipal judge for the Town of Menasha, a position he's held for a number of years. And one of the things, the primary thing that we'll be discussing with Mr. Kachinsky this evening is his consideration for running for the Winnebago County Circuit Court Branch 4 judgeship. So welcome.
Oh, nice to see you again, Cheryl.
It's nice
Tony.
to have you here for the first time. So why don't we start by you telling us and the viewers a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into, you know, why you're thinking of running.
Sure. I wasn't born in the Fox River Valley, but I lived here most of my life and went to college at Ripon and law school at Madison. And then I was on active duty for 4 years as an Army JAG officer at Fort Knox, Kentucky, as I owed him 4 years due to a ROTC scholarship. And then stayed in the reserves, been in private practice here ever since 1982. And except for 3 times when I was called up for military duty during the First and Second Gulf Wars. I'm also the municipal judge in the Town of Menasha since 1997.
Now, you're thinking about, and you're just sort of exploring the possibility of running for the seat currently occupied by Judge Robert Hawley. Why are you thinking about running?
Well, I've always enjoyed being a judge since I've been in the Town of Menasha, and even going back when I was in the first time in active duty in the Army, I was a military magistrate at Fort Knox, had search warrant authority. And I thought it's a job that, especially as I've been a Town of Menasha judge, that I can do a good job at. I think there's a problem generally that we observed with some of the problems involving Joe Paulus, that when persons are in public office too long, they become complacent and arrogant and don't do as good a job for the public as they ought to be doing, and they forget who their boss is. And I think that might be the case here.
Well, you do have quite an impressive resume, and I noticed that you received the Army Commendation Medal for your 6-month tour of duty at Fort Eustis, Virginia, as an administrative law officer in support of Operation Operation Enduring Freedom. I'm sorry. What is an administrative law officer?
Sure. Administrative law officer is sort of like a corporation counsel. I was sort of the John Bodner, so to speak, of Fort Eustis. I would provide legal advice to the command on things like requests from private organizations to use military resources or the legality of military separation actions, things like that.
Right. And you received a commendation for it, so that's, I guess, something you're very proud of.
Yes, it was nice.
Yeah.
You never turn those down.
Yes. Why are you running, or why are you thinking about running in the 4th Circuit? That's Judge Hawley, correct?
Correct.
Isn't it true that Judge Gritton is also up for re-election?
Yes, he is. Judge Gritton's a good friend of mine. I worked on his campaign when he first got elected back, I believe it was in 1999 or 1998. And I guess I thought of running against Judge Carver 2 years ago, but so the personal circumstances that went on when I was mobilized and my law firm fell apart kind of made it difficult to do that. But now there's opportunity, and frankly, I'm sometimes disappointed in the way that Judge Hawley runs his court. I thought that I could do a better job.
All right, let's talk about that. What is it about Judge Hawley's court that you've been disappointed by?
Well, I think it's a problem that's kind of endemic in Winnebago County, and that is it's kind of a lot of times kind of an assembly line system, and there's not consideration of individual cases and persons that are litigants in that court or attorneys in that court and many other courts in the county.
What do you mean by assembly line system?
Well, it's kind of, you've got something like 30 or 40 or 50 cases all scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning or a Monday morning, and you'll sit there from 9 o'clock until 11 or 12 o'clock, and sometimes even then you don't get to the case. And there's not really a careful individual consideration of the merits of individual cases sometimes.
But that can't be unique to Judge Hawley, is it?
Well, not unique to Judge Hawley, no.
So what is it about Judge Hawley's court that you said you would have some problems with?
I think it's just in his case, I think sometimes judges will take extra time in spite of their docket load.
Oh.
He
runs through them.
I think he runs through them faster than, at least than I would. Every judge has their own style, and I know in certain cases he does take a lot of time, like juvenile cases, to talk to kids, but some of the other more ordinary cases, a lot of clients, people go through his court and feel they haven't had an opportunity to state their case.
All right, Cheryl?
Well, you know, I've covered, because of my profession, certainly a lot of court cases, and I've seen you in, I think, probably every judge's courtroom. Are there any other things that stand out within Judge Hawley's court that, you know, are issues for you?
I think that more than anything. I just feel people don't feel that they're being heard. Sometimes, I guess there's some people complain he doesn't look, you know, terribly enthusiastic about his job, and when you've been in a job for 24 years, as he has, you lose some of your initial enthusiasm. I think it's something that happens to all public officials, but personally, I wouldn't stay in that job for more than 3 terms.
Okay.
Only 18 years.
Only 18 years. So it is a long time. It's not like the Cincinnatus of old Greek times.
Well, you know, we haven't even heard yet whether or not Judge Hawley will seek the bench again, but I personally have heard, and I think a lot of us have, that there's some rumblings going on that our current DA, Bill Lennon, may seek this position, and also Court Commissioner Dan Bissett, who made a bid for Scott Wolt's, Judge Scott Wolt's seat this last election. What makes you stand out amongst those 2 individuals should they run against you?
I think compared to both District Attorney Lennon and Mr. Bissett, that I've had considerably more experience in higher profile cases, more appellate cases, more really complex cases like racketeering and sexually violent person cases that they have not had. And of course, as compared to Lennon, I've had a judicial position. I'd say they're all very good attorneys. For that matter, Judge Hawley, I think, has served our county very well in his years, but there just comes a time when we should have the best available person in the job.
Len, last year or the year before, when Judge Hazy announced his retirement, there was an appointment process, and you were one of the people that applied to be appointed by Governor Doyle. I think about 13 people applied, and ultimately it was Scott Wolt that was given the position. Dan Bissett, who ran against Wolt, suggested, not so subtly, that it was because Wolt had given money to Doyle during his campaigns. Is that what you think happened there?
No, I think Judge Wolt's done a very good job. He certainly deserved the appointment. He deserved to get re-elected. Frankly, I think when you have a Democratic governor, he certainly has a right within certain broad limits to appoint people that have been his supporters as opposed to those that haven't. So I have nothing against that, even though Wolt and I are from the opposite side of the political spectrum in terms of partisan politics.
So you thought it was a purely partisan decision then?
Largely, well, I mean, you get a talent, first of all, he meets the basic criteria of having sufficient legal experience and temperament. I think Judge Wolt had that. For that matter, so did Dan Bissett. But I think with those other factors being equal, I think certainly the Democrats and the Republicans have the right to put persons that have supported the party into those positions, and then let the people decide like they decided at the spring elections.
Okay, Cheryl?
You know, as we mentioned in the open, you are both a criminal defense attorney and also a municipal court judge for the town of Menasha. Is it difficult for you to look at the law from both sides of the fence, or do you think that that being able to do that would actually give you some kind of a unique advantage in a race for circuit court seat?
I think having both perspectives really gives me a unique advantage, and it gives me a unique advantage for that matter in terms of private clients, because I can tell them how judges think, because I have to think that way at least 3 times a month on Thursday nights in the town of Menasha. So I think it's good that you've had that perspective, and I think too another aspect is that having been in the private sector, you also understand some things that people that have been exclusively or almost exclusively in government during their professional careers don't have.
So you're not as jaded, I guess, if you will, as someone who has been in the political spectrum the whole time?
Well, I think, there gets to be kind of an insider syndrome when you've got people that are within the Winnebago County, establishment in the court, in the courthouse, then getting promoted and staying in the system. They forget what some of the rest of us have it like in the real world. That we don't have guaranteed incomes and not have to worry about fringe benefits and things like that, which is someone who's been in the private sector understands, or what it's like to represent a real live client.
Sure.
I read, Len, that when Joseph Paulus first ran for DA, you handed out literature for him.
I did.
And, well, what was your relationship with him throughout his tenure as DA?
Sure. When Mr. Paulus first ran for election, I believe it was in 1988, eventually against who's now Judge Key, he was a breath of fresh air. He was, I think, dynamic, honest, and at that time, I think, a really good DA. I think the problem with Paulus is that over time, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He was not challenged for election more than a couple of times, and the power got to his head.
But over those years, did you, as an attorney active in the court system, did you sense that there was possibly corruption at work?
I started to sense toward the end there was favoritism, that certain attorneys, particularly Mr. Shearland, was getting unusually good deals that nobody else was getting, including me, for reasons that didn't seem to make any sense. And of course, this was eventually confirmed by a study done by the Oshkosh Northwestern, as well as by what's gone on in criminal proceedings. So we knew there was some kind of favoritism, and we weren't sure whether it was just for future political favors, or as it turned out, for cash exchanging hands.
There is an ongoing investigation of Mr. Paulus over the years. Do you have a sense of whether we're going to see other attorneys in this county that may be subject of charges?
I know 2 other attorneys that are the primary persons that are the subject of possible investigations beyond what Shearland was doing. I don't know whether there's, again, if it was political favoritism or actual corruption.
Okay. Well, do you think that citizens of this county can now be confident that justice has been restored? I mean, we know that Paulus was using heavy-handed tactics and out-and-out breaking laws while in that office. Has it been your sense as an attorney that all that now is gone and that we're completely now on the up and up in this county?
I think the corruption element is gone, but the corruption element could easily reappear when you've got a system that basically perpetuates itself almost incestuously by promoting almost entirely from within without outside competition.
Well, what's the role of a circuit court judge in all that? If you were to be elected circuit court judge, what is your role in maintaining the integrity of justice in the county?
Especially in the sort of cases that are the most prone to corruption, which is drunk driving cases. You have to insist that the prosecutors and defense attorneys follow the rule, and if they're going to get an OWI amended, there be some real justification for it, which as the statutes require. And if there's something that seems funny, you have to do what Judge Key did and eventually refer it to Office of Lawyer Regulation or to law enforcement authorities for investigation.
Sure.
Do you think that I'm kind of asking you to gaze into a crystal ball here about Joe Paulus. Is it your sense, Len, that we will be seeing some other things coming down the pike in the way of possible charges, or what's your thought on that? It's
hard to say, and I don't have any inside information as to what may have gone on in some other cases. I know a couple of other cases that are highly suspicious involving one local attorney and a very prominent, wealthy family. But we may see some more of that. I don't think we're going to see a lot more.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but like, it was a long time ago, but you did work in Joe Paulus's campaign. How can you assure potential voters that you're not part of a Joe Paulus kind of old boy network? Because there are some voters in this county who want to just clear the slate of anything even remotely associated with Joe Paulus.
Well, the Joe Paulus of 1988 is not the Joe Paulus of 2002 that got thrown out of office. I think initially in his term, Joe Paulus, did some media hype sort of things, but he wasn't corrupt in the sense of the criminal law. But as we got into the late 1990s and thereafter, he was unchallenged. That's when he became corrupt. So a lot of people backed Joe Paulus in 1988 because he was the Republican candidate, and they thought it was time for that to happen. So it's just not the same thing. And I've never heard my name mentioned as anybody who's been possibly thought of as being investigated for any type of corruption.
Thank God,
huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
What what do you see, Len, as some of the problems with our judicial system today? Not necessarily with any specific judge, but just the system overall.
Well, a lot of the system is, the problem is that you've got careerists that have just, a lot of times, as in the case of Judge Hawley, been judges just for too long beyond when they've really done their usefulness to society. And I think we need somewhat more circulation of elected officials, both in the judicial branch, just like we have to a better extent in the legislative branch. So a lot of times the judges become bureaucratic. They see themselves, instead of serving the people, as serving as instrumentalities of the government establishment. And that's, I think, gradually what's happened to Judge Hawley, is that he's become, I think he tends to view his job more as, what do I do to keep the courthouse running smoothly, as opposed to what do I do to serve the people that elected me.
What about the system as a whole? Sentencing guidelines, requirements placed upon judges and lawyers, for that matter. Do you see any inherent problems within our judicial system today?
Well, I think some sentencing guidelines are good. I think we have to rely a large extent on judicial discretion. And the reason we elect people as judges, I guess the antidote to bad judging or subpar judging is to elect good judges. That's always, I think, the problem, anything in a democracy. It's you're as good as the quality of your elected officials. So I don't think the system itself is necessarily that bad. We've got limited resources we can devote to criminal justice, and we have to use those resources to those persons that are most dangerous to society. So people can complain they think somebody's gotten a slap on the wrist when they shouldn't have, and sometimes judges have been more lenient than they should have, and sometimes they've been harsher than they should have. But it's just a matter, I think, of electing good public officials.
How do you feel about truth in sentencing? Do you think that was a good idea? And if so, do you think it's working the way it was intended to?
I think truth in sentencing was a good idea generally. I generally have favored, though, some of the modifications that have been made to it, such as the earned release program and some of the other modifications that take care of some of the more unusual situations, to give some kind of positive incentives to prisoners to adapt in treatment. Right now, the only incentives are negative ones. For example, if you're someone that's been convicted on a child sexual assault and you don't go to treatment and you're regarded as dangerous, you can be chaptered under Chapter 980. But there's no real positive incentives for a lot of people to try to do a bang-up job in rehabilitation on the idea that they could possibly get out early. I think some of those modifications that have been suggested even by your Democrats down in Madison have been good ones.
I'm not a Democrat.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a Republican.
Maybe you're a former. I'm a former Republican.
Right.
So
I'm a reformed Democrat.
I just want to follow up with one thing.
Sure.
You had mentioned earned release. What exactly is that?
Sure. There's a program that exists in the prison system now that if you're found eligible by a judge and you're convicted of anything except a few specified crimes, such as homicide or something, that if you can successfully complete a treatment program, Then the initial period of confinement that you're given by a judge is converted into supervised release, and then you can serve the sentence outside, basically on parole, if you finish the treatment program.
Okay, all right, good.
Len, if you do run, will you accept public endorsements from attorneys?
I will. I think when Court Commissioner Bissett refused to accept endorsements and refused to accept contributions from attorneys, that was a mistake. I think attorneys have the same First Amendment rights as anybody else to support candidates. Now, I think there should be limits on it, and I personally am going to set a limit of $250 as political contributions because that's considerable. That's
so if hypothetical attorney John Smith gives you $250 and then argues a case in front of your court, the public shouldn't have to worry about any possible conflict there.
I think the amount is relatively small enough compared to the overall expenses of a campaign and compared to the contributions that others are going to make that it's not going to make any difference. Frankly, for example, it's just like when I've been a political supporter of candidates for district attorneys that I'll support them for the election and then we'll argue in court the next day. The only thing a political contribution has generally gotten me is a quicker return on a phone call. Somebody will say no a lot. I'll know, but they're going to say no a lot faster than just dodge them.
What about endorsements from law enforcement personnel, sheriff, police officers? Would you accept those?
I would, sure. I think again the same limitations as long as the dollar amounts are small, and you know, I expect to get some support perhaps from hopefully from members of the Town of Menasha, but it's never had any effect on my rulings, and I've ruled against them from time to time.
How does you're the municipal court judge in Menasha, Town of
Correct,
Menasha?
yes.
How does that differ from a circuit court judge?
Sure. The authority of a municipal judge is much more limited. The only sort of cases that appear in front of me are traffic and ordinance violations that are non-criminal in nature, so I can't sentence anybody to jail.
Okay.
And they're only ones that are issued in the Town of Menasha by Town of Menasha police, so it's pretty limited. It conflicts me out of a few cases that I could take as a criminal defense attorney if there's something related that would be in my municipal court, of course. But
yeah, pardon me if this is an ignorant question, but is it a full-time job?
No.
Okay.
Not at $8,200 a year.
Just wondering. Okay. I thought so. Cheryl?
You know, we've been talking about that you're exploring the possibility. You have not yet made a decision. What will your decision be based on, and when do you expect to make a decision if you choose to do this?
I would make a decision sometime in the fall. I'm going to see how well I'm able to reestablish my practice after I'm released from active duty by the Army at the end of August, and also when I have some more time to explore some more potential supporters and see what they say as compared to my competitors.
So you're still on active duty then as we tape this on July 28th?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Well, you have said, I think, or suggested several times that you have been a Republican or are a Republican. How does that, or does it, impact judicial philosophy?
I don't think partisan affiliation really should affect judicial philosophy. I think just as a matter of shorthand for the voters, they can probably surmise that Republicans might be more harsh or tougher sentence for the Democrat, but not necessarily. I've seen sometimes the opposite to be the case. For example, Judge Carver. So there might be something of that, but generally I don't think it's a significant factor in how a judge behaves. It might affect his general political philosophy that might be reflected.
How would you describe your judicial philosophy?
I would say my favorite Supreme Court justice is Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Why?
That would just, I think he's conservative, but he's certainly not doctrinaire, and he tries to build a consensus in the Supreme Court. I don't have any strong ideological connections with business interests or with law enforcement or prosecution, for that matter.
Does a circuit court judge have any leeway as regards the precedent? I mean, I know judges have to follow precedent, correct?
Right.
As a circuit court judge, aren't you almost bound by precedent?
Oh, absolutely. You can't just say the Court of Appeals decided this case wrongly, I'm doing something else. Sometimes, though, you get novel issues, like, for example, I raised in a case the constitutionality of the 1,000-foot penalty enhancer for drug cases in front of a circuit judge, and a judge had to make a decision. Or you make decisions on constitutionality. And in fact, even in the Town of Menasha, I had to declare an ordinance that was an ordinance as contrary to state law because it was an area that was preempted by state regulations. So sometimes you get those sort of decisions, but you don't set binding precedents.
Right. What about, I guess we would call it judicial temperament. How do you think a judge should behave in the courtroom?
Well, a judge should, first of all, be a good listener, listen to both sides carefully. He should be an informed listener. That is, he should know what the relevant law and principles are in a case before the case starts out in front of him. Treat people with respect, dignity, and do what he can to give them a sense that even if he rules against them, that he's considered their viewpoints, and not simply say, well, I've only got 1 minute to hear this case, talk quick, and then make a decision. I think it's important, even if you decide against somebody, to let them feel at least that they've had their say. And a lot of times that's all they want. I mean, you got to cut it off sometimes. You can't let people go on forever. Right. But
I mean, these judges we see on television, you know, like Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown and all these people, does that have any basis in reality? I mean, telling people off, getting very emotional.
That's not what I do.
Have you seen judges behave that way?
At times.
Is it inappropriate in your judgment?
I don't think it's appropriate to tell somebody off like that, no.
Okay, okay. Because I find it incredible. I mean, they have people like in a divorce court, for example, where the judge will just start telling off one of the spouses. And I'm wondering, are they doing that just for theater on television, or does that actually happen?
I think it's mostly theater.
Okay.
And when you can get $25 million a year like Judge Judy, you know, why not? Some of the things that you have done is you've argued hundreds of appellate cases. Also, you've made an oral argument before the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the Seventh Circuit. The other two folks, Bill Lennon and Dan Bissett, should you all be on a ballot together, they have practically no experience in that. How would that help you as a judge, do you think?
I think it helps you in a few things. First of all, the fact that you've done lots of appellate cases it helps you maintain a consciousness that you're creating a record that could get appealed, and you'll just do a better technical job of knowing what the law is and applying it, and remembering that there is a record there to be made. And I think the fact that you've done appellate arguments also gives you better time when there's arguments there in circuit court to know how to do it. And occasionally even judges in certain cases should issue written decisions, even in trial level cases. And I've done that even as a Town of Menasha judge. So I think it just gives you an overall better perspective, especially in the more complex cases.
Okay. All right.
What do you think about the current Wisconsin Supreme Court? There's, over the years, it seems like there's a lack of collegiality among them. They seem to hate each other almost. I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but I mean, I know you've heard that. Do you think the current Supreme Court is doing a good job?
I think they do a good job. Our society is diverse. There's elements of liberals, elements of conservatives, people with different philosophies, and we can't expect the court to be that much different. I've argued in front of them, I think, maybe 3 or 4 times. I've always found them to be respectful, well-informed, interesting, good analysis of cases in front of them. So I think they've done a good job.
I want to ask you one question about the United States Supreme Court, because this issue is coming up in a lot of discussions. As you know, the U.S. Supreme Court recently decided that private property can be taken for essentially a private economic development. And lots of property advocates and others are just shocked by that decision. It's eminent domain. What is your view on what the court did in that decision?
I think that was an incorrectly decided case. I think that to permit that the taking of somebody's property, even with compensation, just for a private interest, is an open invitation to corruption and favoritism by government, and it's not really what the United States was meant to be.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's kind of backfiring on what is it, Judge Souter?
There's a movement to take his house.
Or some property that he owns. I don't think it's the actual house that he lives in, but that could very well happen.
Okay.
If you run, Len, and you should be elected, what kinds of changes, if any, would you like to make within you know, the judicial system here in Winnebago County, or even within just Branch 4?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the basics, and we're going to do the basics right. We're going to start court pretty close to on time. I understand why people can be late. Lawyers have to be sometimes two places at once. It's happened to me occasionally. But we're going to start pretty close to on time. We're not going to have 50 initial appearances all scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday and have the assistant DA show up at 2 minutes before and then ask the judge for half an hour to discuss cases with the litigants. If it's going to be 9 o'clock, it's going to start awfully close to 9 o'clock. So that's one thing you can do for sure. Second of all, when you actually have a case, I'm going to give out each side the opportunity to say a few things and listen to them, and at least let them say their piece to the extent you can do without destroying the calendar. We're going to also work with some of the innovations that have been done. I think every judge now uses the victim impact panels, for example, in OWI cases. I know Judge Walt's working on drug courts, and I'll certainly be interested in giving some input on that. And I've actually had a case in drug court in Milwaukee County, and a member of my reserve unit's a public defender there has given me some tips about what he thinks about it as well. So that's going to be the most important thing, is getting the basics and getting the basics right and better than they have been. I think we'll also look at technology. In federal court, where I have practiced, for example, they have electronic filing. We're perhaps not ready to do that yet in circuit court, but in certain cases where we've got attorneys and litigants that can support that, and I think we have the equipment in our county. We can at least start some experiments with electronic filing of court documents, which we don't have before.
Okay.
What do you think of the Metropolitan Enforcement Group, the MEG unit? There have been concerns over the years that it's a drug war creation, I suppose. There have been concerns that it's violated people's civil liberties and that there's not enough judicial oversight of it. What's your view?
Well, back when I was in Fort Knox, Kentucky as a prosecutor, I was the advisor to the drug unit there. So I've had a lot of familiarity with how they operate. I think the problem is not the judicial supervision of the MEG unit, because what they do a lot of times is without judicial supervision giving incorrect information on warrants. The judge doesn't know. When he gets a warrant, a judge has to take a sworn affidavit on his face that the officer's telling him the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So whatever problems are with the MEG unit, with illegal arrests, with going to the wrong place, and things like that, the remedy, of course, is if the case gets to court, to suppress it if that's appropriate under the law, or if it's a place where they find nothing, of course, the folks can file a claim against the relevant law enforcement agency and eventually pursue it in court. So I think that's the real answer.
Have things like MEG units, in your opinion, actually helped the drug problem, or have they made it worse?
I think they've helped. You have to go over more than one jurisdiction to effectively deal with some of these larger operations. And I think that's basically the idea of the MEG unit, is that if you just have a local police department doing it, suppose somebody that wants to go from Appleton to the town of Menasha or Fond du Lac, where you've got connections down in out of state. So I think you'll want to use something like the MEG unit.
And it sounds like you think there is enough oversight of it.
I think a judicial oversight, now they can always, the supervisors within the unit itself, the police can always do a better job. Perhaps it'd be nice if they got better recorders that actually picked up some of these conversations, because a lot of times they wire their informants, but you listen to it on tape and you don't hear very much.
Yeah, it's kind of muffled and so forth. Okay. Let's talk about sentencing a little bit. We briefly touched on it before. How do you feel about some of the sentences that are handed down? Do you see too much incarceration? Do you think it's just the right amount? And if you were elected to the bench, should you run? Would you employ more creative type sentencing as much as state law permits?
I would be a great disappointment to almost everyone in my sentencing policies if I was elected judge, because people that know me as a defense attorney would probably find my sentences to be much harsher than they expected. Those who knows me as a Ronald Reagan Republican would find them to be more lenient than they expected. The idea with sentences is not to be the toughest judge in the county. It's not to be the most lenient judge in the county. It's to be the fairest judge in the county. Each case has to be judged individually. I've disagreed sometimes with sentences, both on both ends of the scale. I think it's important, perhaps most important, is to be reasonably predictable. One thing people want out of judges is at least to have a good idea of what's going to happen. And I think to go on personal quirks for certain things, on just a certain case or something like that, I think is really an abuse of the position. You should have reasonably consistent policies and follow them, and that's what the people want and deserve in a judge.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's been some controversy all over the country in the last couple of years about the use of stun guns, tasers. Do you think it's time to ban those? The Department of Homeland Security has, I think, banned them for officers in that unit, if I'm not mistaken. What's your view on those?
I've never actually seen a demonstration of a taser gun. I understand basically what they do. They're meant to be non-lethal, and they're better than when the alternative is to use deadly force.
Well, apparently about 90 people have been killed in this country from stun guns.
And I know they've been killed from beanbags right in our own county,
exactly.
which is another non-lethal means. I think we have to continue to work on trying to find like the energy beams they're experimenting on now in Iraq, to see if something like that works that can control a difficult situation without causing fatalities or significant injuries.
Okay. Cheryl?
You've practiced, obviously, in Winnebago County. You've also practiced in Outagamie County, and I see from your qualifications and resume here that you've done some things in Fond du Lac County as well, as an assistant DA, a special type of assistant DA down there. What are some of the differences that you see between the various counties that we might be able to improve upon here?
I think that's perhaps one thing I can bring to the judgeship that the other candidates that have been mentioned for the position can't. You know, I've actually had cases in about 36 different Wisconsin counties of different types, as well as federal court, which a lot of them haven't. You see different types of scheduling practices, for example, in Outagamie or Fond du Lac County, different ways. For example, in Outagamie County, you can get a lot more individualized consideration of misdemeanor cases than you get in Winnebago County.
Because of timing, or
because of the way they set up their schedule, use their court commissioners, and so forth. You can see different types of just judicial temperament and how judges do things that you don't see if you just stay in one county all the time. It becomes, again, kind of an inbred system, which I think is very bad for a system of justice.
Well, why do you think that is here in Winnebago County, Len? I mean, surely these judges are friends with judges in other counties. If not, they, I'm sure, hear things. Why do we have, for example, the scheduling that we do? Because it's difficult not only on the defendants and the lawyers involved, but court spectators. I mean, some, I realize, just have all day to sit there, but for those of us who are covering a court case too, you know, we show up at a certain time and we too can get wrapped up for hours sitting there. So why does Winnebago County do it like that?
A lot of what goes on in government is a question of bureaucratic inertia. It goes on because it's always been that way, and you can't change it. If you change it, the whole system is going to break down. And I know there's some judges have tried to fix that. I know, for example, Judge Wolt's court has done as good a job as it can within some of the constraints in trying to phase out or to phase in certain types of cases so they're not all going to be there jamming the parking lot at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday or Wednesday or Monday morning. So a lot of things happen just because they always have been that way, and you get people that have always been in the same old system. They think, well, this is the way it should ought to be. There's no need to change it. That's why I think you need someone who's a courthouse outsider to come in and be a judge. And I know Judge Wolt's about the only member of the judiciary that we have in this county now that hasn't spent at least 80% of his life in the public sector.
Okay.
Len, as you know, the bulk of the cost for corrections falls on counties. It's pretty much an unfunded mandate. Do you think that judges should take a more active advocacy role in getting the state to pick up more of the cost? And if you were elected as a judge, would you do that?
Yes, I mean, I think one part of the judicial office is a bully pulpit, whether it's for adequate funding for any type for the justice system. For example, Judge Freilich, who was a very conservative Republican when he was a congressman and a state legislator, has been one of the primary advocates for more funding for the public defender's office. Because if you don't have adequate representation for criminal defendants and the state dominates it, injustice almost invariably occurs. So you have to use the bully pulpit from time to time when it's appropriate to make sure that the system functions properly.
Do you think the funding of the system currently is just out of whack?
I think in terms of the defense resources, a lot of times, yes, the defense resources are just not adequate. The number of attorneys on the public defender list continues to decline because the rate is about 20 to 25% of what a private paying client would get.
Was this even addressed in this current budget in Madison, getting more funds for public defenders?
No, the budget, the hourly rate for public defender attorneys was reduced from $50 an hour to $40. I think it was approximately 10 years ago, and one of Governor Thompson's budgets has never gone back up. And of course, in the meantime, the cost of running a law office and the cost of living has increased. So,
and to be eligible for a public defender, you have to be dirt poor. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If you're correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that if you are working full time at minimum wage, you make too much money for a public defender.
That's correct, and the result of that is that the counties have to appoint attorneys because under the U.S. Constitution, you may be entitled to free counsel because you realistically can't afford an attorney, and then the counties pick it up and it goes on the property tax.
So is it too much of an exaggeration, Len, to say that in the United States you get the justice you can pay for? I mean, do we have a fair system of justice in your judgment? We
have the fairest system that probably exists in the world. But there are certainly problems with it, and we can do better to make sure that persons receive fair and complete justice that they're entitled to.
Okay, Cheryl.
You know, I've seen and heard different things. You've got your public defenders, and I think a lot of people have been under the impression that there is just a public defender's office, which there is, and they have their own attorneys there, correct?
Right.
And then there are other attorneys, such as yourself, who can be appointed by the court, but it's a kind of a pay. They set you up on a payment plan, basically, correct? If you can't afford the going rate that you may charge, I've seen judges do this. You know, they'll say, well, you know, if you're not eligible for a public defender, then you know, we've got a payment plan that we can set you up on. What happens? What kind of an attorney does someone who's going on a payment plan get? Is it any criminal defense attorney, or how does that work? Because I think a lot of people are confused by that.
There is one other thing that makes it even more confusing, and that is the public defender's office, of course, has their staff that does cases, but then as a result of conflicts and also state mandates, has to farm out anywhere from 25 to 50% of their cases. So that's one source of confusion. So you can, and the courts have developed their own lists, on a county by county system, as to who they're going to appoint for so-called deemed cases, where somebody doesn't meet the public defender criteria under the statutes for eligibility, but under the U.S. Constitution really is entitled to counsel because they realistically can't afford it. So it is confusing how the quality is. The quality varies. Some of the public defenders are really good. Some are, you know, lackadaisical or inexperienced. So the quality varies.
Okay. All right.
Circuit court judges, in my opinion, are probably the hardest working, in the sense that I don't think they have the same kind of staff that judges at higher levels have. But even given that, do you think circuit court judges should be more active in the community? I mean, you talked earlier about having a bully pulpit. What would that mean in terms of, say, community activism? What kinds of things would you as a judge want to be involved in the community?
I think actually our judges are fairly active in the community in different ways. For example, in working with Boy Scouts, teen courts, court visits, classrooms and things like that. I know even in the Town of Menasha Municipal Court, we send a letter out every fall to all the high school social studies teachers saying, hey, if you want your kids to see a real court at night, you don't have to take off and skip class, come to us. I think promoting the legal system is a very appropriate role for judges, just trying to develop knowledge of it and respect for it, because a lot of persons, all they see is on TV and they see what goes on in the state of California. That doesn't reflect what happens in the state of Wisconsin. And there's other kinds of activities that a judge can get involved in that don't really have a significant likelihood of causing a conflict of interest. For example, a judge can be involved in some charity activities where they need someone to be a judge of some kind of contest or something. Things like that to show that judges are ordinary members of the community. It also gets them out. You don't want a judge who's cloistered. And the only persons he talks to all day are his clerks and the attorneys, because you develop a different perspective of what life is like than if you're talking to someone that works in a foundry or some other type of occupation.
Okay.
One thing that Joe Paulus used to do in his heyday as DA was publicly second guess the decisions of judges. I mean, he would make it known if he thought that the sentence was too lenient and so on. Do you think that's an appropriate thing for officers of the court to do? After a case is decided, and you're a judge, and one of the attorneys, either the prosecutor or the defense attorney, publicly says Kachinsky was just incompetent on this one, how would you deal with that?
I think you can comment on a judge's sentence in a very limited extent.
Have you done that?
I frequently made the comment that I'm disappointed at a judge's sentence and we're going to appeal. I think that's really just about the limits of where you can go. If the prosecutor was to say, I disagree with the sentence, I understand the reasoning, but I think it should have been more, and just kind of leave it like that. But when you go into further and say the judge is incompetent, I think that's definitely over the line. So some comment. And the thing is, if the judge really is not allowed by judicial rules to bite back at somebody like Joe Paulus.
Right.
And so it's always for him it was a big political thing because he had future political ambitions at one point.
Do you believe this Office of Lawyer Regulation, is this a toothless organization? I mean, Mitch Shearland, who ended up being kicked out of the profession, he at one point was president of it, was he not?
No, he was a local representative.
Local representative of it, I'm sorry. So what does that say? If you've got someone like him who's even the local representative, does that suggest it's a toothless organization?
Well, the type of cases where the Office of Lawyer Regulation does the best job, in my experience and just seeing what's in the state publications, is when you've got attorneys stealing from clients with trust account type violations. They do a good job on those type of violations. Or you've got client neglect, where attorneys are just not getting back and doing work for their clients and still getting paid for it, or even regardless of whether there's paid. They do a fairly good job in that type of cases. You've got something that's really of a more complex criminal nature, like was going on with Mitch Shearland and Joe Paulus. The Office of Lawyer Regulation doesn't have the resources to effectively deal with that. I mean, you get people, there's a lot of complaints against lawyers. I mean, I have a couple every year, whether I need them or not. And I think every lawyer that practices law and does anything slightly controversial or has felons for clients, you're going to get a few. Right. But I think it was perhaps unrealistic to expect that Office of Lawyer Regulation would find out much more on Mitch Shearland than the FBI would.
Okay, Cheryl?
We're running out of time. We're down to about 10 minutes or so, and I want to touch on courthouse security for just a little bit. You know, after 9/11, there was a lot of talk about we need to improve courthouse security, and there were a couple of courthouse shootings also that kind of stirred that discussion. A few things were done. There was a metal detector set up for a while, and then that was done away with. What do you feel is the level of security right now here in Winnebago County, and do you think it's appropriate?
It's always a question also, of course, of cost and resources. The present system in Winnebago County, they have sheriff's deputies roving around the courthouse, and they can divert them to the most dangerous situations, which incidentally are almost always family law hearings. So they've got their main stand right outside the family court commissioner's courtroom. I can see the point of going perhaps to metal detectors if you've got adequate facilities that you can get the public in and not having standing in the rain and being late for court. Some places, after they've worked on it for a while, they've gotten it down pretty well. I think Outagamie County does a good job, and it's Justice Center where everyone goes through a metal detector on the way in. And Milwaukee County's had some problems with their system. I've been there, but they're getting better at it as well. So if you've got adequate physical facilities, it's probably a good idea. On the other hand, a lot of people are inconvenienced because they bring in their little hunting knives that they have and folding knives, and they got to go back out to the car and bring them. But that's probably, overall, it's a good idea to have that sort of security, because it's not just the judges that are threatened, but everyone.
Sure.
Of course, sometimes you'll have a situation like happened down in Atlanta, Georgia, where somebody just steals a deputy's gun and starts going at it.
Yeah.
So that I wouldn't protect against.
Right. So you would be an advocate then here in Winnebago County of putting the metal detector, or magnetometer as they call it, back in place, provided that we could get some kind of covering to shield people from inclement weather and kind of get them through rather quickly.
Right, same thing, just like airport security. But I mean, Outagamie County does it. I've never had to wait more than a minute to get in there. So you might also need perhaps some kind of badge system that you could apply for. But let's face it, though, even peaceful badges can have bad emotional days and decide they're going to bring in a gun. So that may not necessarily be a good idea.
Sure.
I want to ask you not how you would decide, but how you would handle a specific case. We have a situation in Oshkosh where the Common Council waived a bid. A citizen sought an opinion from the Attorney General. That office said the Oshkosh Common Council probably broke the law. The Oshkosh City Attorney says we didn't break the law. So these are the positions. If a citizen were to sue in circuit court, would you as a judge give more weight to the Attorney General's opinion on this, or the city attorney? Does a judge at that level just try all the facts? Do those opinions mean anything?
I guess the one question would be, who would have standing to go into court and challenge it, and what would the remedy be for something like that? A lot of times in the federal government, where you've got bid protests or something, there's administrative agencies that...
Well, let's just say I'm a citizen, that I'm upset that now we have an opinion from the Attorney General that says they broke the law. We
also have an opinion from our own district attorney's office that, the law was broken, but they're not going to prosecute this. And that basically they're putting the onus of responsibility to challenge it and bring it forward back on the citizen. And all of us taxpayers are having to foot the bill for this project. And I guess that's why some people are pretty upset about this.
Right. But a judge could say that the person filing the suit has no standing?
I think that's certainly a possibility. There would need to be some type of statutory procedure, which I don't think exists in the state, for a citizen to bring that type of taxpayer suit. The remedy to that might possibly be the political one. I guess I would not reach out and simply fathom some sort of judicial remedy just because I don't like it. And the fact that whether the opinion comes from the Attorney General's office or a city attorney's office, they both are as fallible as anybody else.
Well, that's what many of us, Len, are confused about. If a city attorney is in disagreement with the Attorney General, isn't the city obligated to follow the Attorney General's opinion? Otherwise, why even bother getting the opinion?
As far as my understanding is that the city would be free to follow whichever one of those two opinions it wanted to or thought was the correct one. The Attorney General really doesn't have any direct authority. They're just opinions as to what they would do, and perhaps if there was some lawsuit that arose out of it that might involve the Attorney General's office, you could predict what they're going to do. But
and the reason why I'm troubled by that is because it seems like then what municipalities can do is say, if we like an Attorney General's opinion, we'll follow it. If we don't like it, we won't.
Well, that in fact is what's happening here in the city of Oshkosh.
And doesn't, I don't know, that to me as a citizen, I find that frustrating. Because it says to me, why then even bother getting the Attorney General's opinion if it's going to carry no weight? Well.
Yeah. So you're thinking about running. What will it be dependent upon?
Well, the primary thing I'll be looking for, perhaps more so after I'm released from active duty in the end of August, is seeing how much support there is among the law enforcement community, whether or not the support I'm going to have from people I knew back in the days before I became nonpartisan. Money is not a problem, like it would have been a problem if I decided to run 2 years ago, because I was surprised how fast I could regenerate a law practice when I was called up 2 years ago. I was amazed. It was a great gift from God, I guess. God looks after drunks, fools, the Irish, and mobilized soldiers in no particular order. But the personal, I've got, I think I got the qualifications. I want to see who else runs. So that's the sort of things I'm looking for. I'm quite leaning very heavily toward running, but I haven't, can't ever make up your mind till you actually declare.
Sure.
But all the elements, I think, are there from what the feelings I've been getting from talking to people in the community.
What will you run as?
Well, it's a nonpartisan election, but I will run basically as a courthouse outsider that's going to try to bring some fresh blood and perspective into the courthouse. Someone who's spent over 80% of his professional career in the private sector, even though I've had my foot in the Army Reserve and in municipal court from time to time, who's got a broad perspective from all kinds of things, who's going to be consistent, fair, and judicial when he runs his court.
Okay.
We didn't spend much time on biography, but why don't you tell us about your family? You have a wife and kids?
I got a wife, 2 children, and 2 cats. The 2 children aren't in the house, the cats still are. They're very nice felines, and they're eager to see when I can come home from Camp Atterbury. My son's a professional BMX biker.
Wow.
And my daughter used to work at this station here, and now works in broadcast journalism. Works over in North Carolina at WLOS TV.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you have any contact information if people watch this show and want to encourage you to run? Is there a way they can contact you?
Yes, I still have the website up from when I ran for a municipal judge this spring. It's kachinskyforjudge.org, and there's a guest book you can sign on. You can also click a link and email me as well. And I have plenty of access to email down at Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and at the Holiday Inn Express where I stay at night.
All right, great.
How long are you home for right now? I mean, we've only got like 30 seconds left, but how long are you home for right now?
Till tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
Tomorrow afternoon I'll be on the road back down to Camp Atterbury, and the office will be opening on Saturday morning again. I'll be in the office Saturday morning. Some of our officers have off.
All right. Well, I know we had a little difficult time scheduling this date, because of your active duty, but as a private citizen, thank you for your participation in the military, and thank you for being here. So, and if you decide to run, we hope to have you back.
Okay.
So, all right.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, as always, for joining us and letting us into your homes. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care and keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.